As some of you, or perhaps all of you, noticed, last Sunday, Alon Day became the first Israeli to drive in a NASCAR race. A milestone was reached in the history of the Jewish people. You may know that the gentleman started out as a Formula One racer and switched over to NASCAR because he thought that there might be more, shall we say, lucrative opportunities driving for NASCAR than in Formula One, where the whole sport is a little bit smaller and the cars are a little bit smaller as well. I suggested that he be brought in as our next APAC speaker, and one of the folks at APAC said, well, maybe that we won't have to pay for his transportation. I did not point out to him that the cars that the gentleman drives, even the NASCAR cars, are not exactly street legal, which is a whole other problem. I point this out because every community, every locale has certain driving quirks. Certain quirks. In New York, where I learned how to drive, they cut you off. In Chicago, they speed, something I never do. Yom Kippur is coming. What? And in Cleveland, they tailgate. This is the only community I've ever been in where you can be driving 10 miles above the speed limit in a snowstorm and there's still somebody right on your tail. The other feature, of course, in Cleveland is that if you have a certain degree of luxury car, stop signs are not required and stop lights are optional. This is a peculiarity. A couple of years ago, our older son David was here, and he wanted to buy something. I don't remember what it was, a pair of pants or something, I don't remember. But it turned out that the only place in the area where they had them was someplace in Akron. So we got in the car, and we headed down to Akron. And just as we got to that split between Route 8 and 271, there was an 18-wheeler, rather large 18-wheeler, that needed to get across the lanes. And I think we were in our smaller car. And I realized that the truck driver needed to get over, so I hit the brakes, and I gave him one flash of the lights to signal that it was okay to come over. And he did, he or she, I don't know if it was a male or a female driving the truck. And he flashed the lights around the top, and he flashed the lights of the truck. And David, who had already lived in Israel for a few years at that time, said, was that a thank you? I said, yes, it was. He said, my God, that would never happen in Israel. And it's true, because in Israel, just as there's a certain minhag custom of driving in New York, Chicago, Cleveland, in Israel, you don't give an inch to anybody, ever. If you're on a one-lane street and there's a parking space and you're going to parallel park into it. I know not everybody here knows how to do that. I can teach you. You're going to parallel park, and there's a driver right behind you. Normally with laybacks, you could get in and get it. Nah, they come right up to your bumper. So then you got to go around the block and hope that the thing is still there. But nobody gives an inch, and it's not just in Israel. It's a characteristic of the Middle East in general. Nobody budges. Nobody gets over. Nobody gives you an inch to get over. And that's part of the story of the Torah reading. Because here you've got these little tribal nations that are living in what we would now call Sinai, what we would now call the Kingdom of Jordan, and they're not willing to let the Hebrews go through. Even centuries later, in our Haftarah, they're still arguing about who took whose spot from whom. And it doesn't go away. In fact, it still hasn't gone away. It may never go away. And it's not just that something that happens between the people of Israel and our neighbors, not just something that happens on Route 1 between Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, or even on the new Route 443 from those two places, but it is something that happens throughout the whole life of the people. The controversies that we've seen blow up over the last few days in Israel, over the Kotel, and over the conversion laws, are a perfect example of this kind of driving and this kind of story in the Torah, where you don't give an inch. Nobody's willing to compromise. Of course, the reform movement is willing to compromise, but there are people who are not willing to give an inch. They're not willing to say that, there is a space on that wall for everybody. They're not willing to say that there is space in the presence of God for conversions to Judaism to happen in different ways. It's the same problem. It's not different. Not different at all. Now, there are two issues. One of them is the conversion issue, and up until now, I always thought that that was the more important, and in many ways, it probably still is. The conversion issue, and I need to take it apart for you a little bit, that's the issue where the discussion was just postponed for 6 months. The cabinet the Israeli cabinet was supposed to take it up on Sunday. The conversion issue is a matter of law. In order to change the policy, there will have to be a vote of the Knesset. And the law is like this. The Orthodox-controlled chief rabbinate gets to decide who is halachically a Jew. Purposes of marriage, burial, that sort of thing. The government of Israel has the right to decide who is a Jew for the purposes of the law of return, which means you get automatic citizenship in Israel just by showing up. The qualification for being considered a Jew by the government under the law of return is you have to have had at least one Jewish grandparent. That's the same rules that the Nazis used as deciding who was a Jew, and that was done with intent and forethought. Or you converted to Judaism. Doesn't matter how. Doesn't matter with whom. Doesn't matter if it's Orthodox, Conservative, Reform, Reconstructionist, Vase, Vos, Abi, Gazint, as long as that was outside the land of Israel. It also doesn't matter if you convert within Israel. If you come there not as a Jew and you convert while you're there. So if you go to get married through the Rabbanut, through the official religious channels, or you want to get buried, which most people don't worry about because they're gone by that time, but if you want to get buried, you have to be halakhically a Jew. But to come into the country, to serve in the army, to pay taxes, to vote, to be in the government, whatever else, is a different standard. The problem with this conversion bill is that the effect of this proposed law would be to take the requirement that your conversion be approved by the Haredi-controlled chief rabbinate, and then instead of that just applying to personal status issues, it would apply also to the law of return. In other words, someone who was converted in our movement, or whose mother or grandmother was converted by rabbis who were not recognized in the state of Israel, could not even claim the entry to Israel and citizenship of the law of return. That is a very serious and potentially disastrous change. That's why the law. Now, the idea that it was held up now, we're going around the mulberry bush again for 6 months, is not exactly good news. Because the effect of this delay is that there are a number of, first of all, the Netanyahu becoming any braver or any less self-interested than he is now is not likely to change in 6 months, right? Unless there is some pain inflicted by diaspora Jewry. And that will be another discussion, and something in writing that you will get from me in the next week or so. But what the delay also means is that that several court cases challenging the authority of the chief rabbinate to have a lockhold on this stuff, several of those cases have been percolating in the Israeli courts since 2005. And the Supreme Court was about to take those cases up, and the effect of this action is that all of those cases get frozen now. They get stopped where they are until the end of the 6 months, when they may resume or not, depending on whether there's a settlement made. It's a parliamentary system. It's a little bit different than the relationship between the courts and the legislature here. The Kotel, the wall, is a different issue. The changes in the regulations with regard to the Western Wall are more, as they were described to me, it's more like executive orders. The Knesset doesn't have to pass a bill. It's administrative stuff. And that's going to be the tougher issue. It's going to be the tougher issue. Some in the Orthodox community, some in the Haredi community, have said that Reform Jews and conservative Jews don't even believe there was ever a holy temple there. If you've been a member of this congregation for the last 13 years, that ain't what I taught you. There are some that say that the presence of non-Orthodox Jews somehow sullies the Kedusha, the holiness of the place. And that if, God forbid, women pray there, or women and men pray together, that the holiness is damaged. They've got it totally wrong. Totally wrong. When it comes to the sanctity of objects, the Rambam teaches us that the fact that a temple was there once upon a time is important, it's significant, it's emotionally important, but it's not what generates the Kedusha, it's not what generates the sanctity of that site. We learn that the sanctity does not proceed from an object to the person, but the sanctity emanates from the person and proceeds to the object. A Kiddush cup that was just manufactured, according to the Rambam, has no Kiddush, it has no sanctity. But when it's used to make Kiddush on Shabbos and a holiday, when it's used for a generation or 2 generations or 3 generations or 4 generations, as my Kiddush cup has now been used, that's where it gets its sanctity, from the people. The sanctity of the Kotel is not from the rocks, it's from us. It's from millennia of Jews who prayed there. The sanctity of the Al-Aqsa Mosque on top of the artificial hill is there because generations of Muslims have prayed there. And the sanctity of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is just a few yards away, is there because of the generations of Christians of all types who have venerated and observed and worshiped there. The Parthenon is still standing, but nobody considers it kadosh anymore. It's not holy to anybody. It's an interesting and important archaeological and tourist site, but nobody thinks of it as holy anymore. Stonehenge was holy to somebody. Druids, Chrysler dealers, I don't know who was there, but it was holy to somebody. But it isn't anymore. Again, interesting site, important site, but not holy in anybody's estimation. But the holiness of a place is maintained when people continue to come there and add their holiness to it. So anybody who restricts anyone's entrance to or access to the Kotel in any way is diminishing the sanctity of that holy place. it robs every generation of Jews who worship there or who wanted to worship there of the Kedusha that they bring and that they brought. You all know the phrase, Eretz Zavat Chalav U'Davash, where Israel is described to the Hebrews as a land flowing with milk and honey. There's another expression for the qualities of the land of Israel that our kids know from Birkat HaMazon. Eretz Tova U'Rochba, a land that is good and wide. Wide. So you look at the map. Denker, what are you talking about? You know, Russia's wide, China's wide, America's wide. I won't sing patriotic songs, even though it's close to July 4th. Israel is not wide. It's a lot of things. Wide it ain't. But what does that Rochba then mean? Again, that saying that Israel is a good and wide land means that there's emotional, spiritual, tolerance, a width and a breadth of thinking and of heart and of spirit that leaves room for everybody, except when you're driving into Tel Aviv. Shabbat Shalom.